100 people held their breath. Marcus Calloway stood at the microphone, spotlight catching every angle of his jaw, every rehearsed crease of his smile. The Ashbury Grand Gala, 40 stories above the city, mirrored walls reflecting 1,000 champagne flutes and twice as many secrets. This was not the kind of event you attended. It was the kind of event that summoned you. And Marcus had spent 3 years clawing his way into this room. "There are moments," he said, voice smooth as polished marble, "when a man realizes he has been living below his potential. In his career," he paused, letting the silence do its damage. "And in his marriage." The room stopped breathing. Serena Calloway sat at table 9, near the eastern window. Navy dress, no jewelry. The kind of woman who could vanish into a crowded room and make that disappearance feel deliberate. She felt 500 gazes land on her like a slow avalanche, and she did not flinch. She did not look away. She simply watched her husband cross the ballroom floor, take the hand of a woman named Natalie Crane, and sink to one knee. The gasps came in a wave. The ring caught the light. Natalie's smile stretched to its maximum performance. Marcus beamed with the particular relief of a man who had just detonated a bridge and mistaken the explosion for fireworks. But Serena was not watching the proposal. She was watching table 2. 3 people in gray suits. No name tags. The particular stillness of people who did not need a network because the room already knew who they were. One of them, a man named Douglas Pemberton, had already opened his phone. And somewhere across the city, in a private compound that housed 12 obsidian black Bugattis, every engine was already running. Nobody in that ballroom understood yet. Not Marcus. Not Natalie. Not Judith Calloway. Marcus's mother, stationed near the bar with satisfaction spreading across her face like a slow stain. The 3 people at table 2 were not just attorneys. They were board members of Hargrove Dynamics, a $500 billion tech empire with no public photograph of its incoming heir. And every single person in that room who mattered, every titan, every legacy name, every quietly powerful face, already knew exactly who Serena Calloway was. They had known before the gala started. They had come tonight specifically to watch what Marcus would do. And now they had their answer. 12 hours earlier, Serena Calloway was ironing her husband's shirt. Not because she had to, because 12 years of marriage had taught her that small, invisible acts of care were the only language Marcus ever received without argument. She pressed the collar flat, hung it on the door hook, and stood back. The way a woman stands back from something she has poured herself into for longer than she should have. Marcus was already on his phone. He had been on it before his eyes were fully open, and Serena had long since stopped asking who he was talking to at 6 in the morning. But she knew, the way a woman always knows, not from evidence, but from the particular quality of a man's silence when someone specific is on the other end. His name was Marcus Calloway, Regional Director of Calloway Capital Ventures, a mid-tier investment firm built on relentless networking and his mother's inherited connections. He was the kind of man who walked into rooms and immediately recalibrated where the power was sitting. Handsome in the way that photographs well, charming in the way that only works until someone is paying close attention. And for 12 years, Serena had been paying very close attention. She had married him young, 23, fresh from a grief she had never fully explained to anyone. Her grandfather, Arthur Hargrove, had died 6 months before the wedding, and the version of Serena that walked down the aisle was already carrying something heavy and unspoken. Marcus had mistaken her quietness for simplicity. He had never thought to ask what was underneath it. What was underneath, it would have changed everything. 3 years before that morning, in a glass-paneled office on the 44th floor of a building that carried no public sign, Serena had sat across from Douglas Pemberton, lead counsel for the Hargrove Legacy Trust. The room smelled of cedar and old money. Douglas slid a document across the table with the careful deliberateness of someone handling something irreplaceable. "You are the sole designated heir to Hargrove Dynamics," he said. "Current valuation, $54 billion. The transition of control is yours to time, but until you activate it, Miss Hargrove, nothing moves and nothing is disclosed." Serena looked at the document for a long time. Then she looked out the window at the city below. All those people moving in straight lines, convinced they understood who held power and who did not. "I need more time," she said quietly. Douglas nodded. "The trust will wait." It has waited 70 years. It can wait a little longer. She drove home that evening, walked in the kitchen, and made dinner. Marcus came home late. She did not ask from where. They ate in the particular silence of two people sharing a table, but not a life. She said nothing about the 44th floor, nothing about Douglas Pemberton, nothing about the $54 billion that now legally and irrevocably belonged to her. Because her grandfather had taught her something that Marcus Calloway, with all his networking and all his charm, had never learned. The most dangerous person in any room is the one nobody is watching. Marcus finished his call that morning, knotted his tie in the mirror, and told Serena, without turning to face her, that his mother would be stopping by in the afternoon to collect a few things. Serena paused. The iron was still warm in her hand. She understood with the precision of a woman who had been bracing for something for longer than she admitted exactly what collect a few things meant. It meant Judith Calloway had already decided. And when Judith decided something, Marcus did not resist. He never had. Judith arrived at 2 in a black SUV with 2 hired men and the expression of someone completing an overdue errand. She walked through Serena's home, the home Serena had decorated, maintained, and quietly loved, and she directed those 2 men with the brisk efficiency of a woman who felt absolutely no conflict about what she was doing. By 3:15, Serena's clothing was in bags on the pavement. Her books, her grandmother's photograph, the small ceramic dish she kept her rings in, all of it on the street. Judith dusted her hands, looked at Serena, standing on the front step, and said only 4 words. Marcus has moved on. Serena looked at her belongings scattered across the concrete. Then she looked at Judith, and she did something that unsettled Judith more than any argument could have. She smiled, not bitterly, not desperately, but with the quiet certainty of a woman who had just been handed the exact permission she had been waiting 12 years to receive. She pulled out her phone. She made one call. What did that call set in motion? And why had Serena been waiting? Not for Marcus to change. For this exact moment. Natalie Crane was everything Marcus had convinced himself Serena was not. Polished where Serena was understated. Vocal where Serena was measured. She wore ambition like a second skin. And Marcus, who had always confused loudness for strength, had mistaken her performance for substance. She was the founder of Crane Innovations, a mid-sized tech startup that had burned through 2 funding rounds and was now quietly hemorrhaging capital behind a very expensive public-facing facade. What Marcus did not know, what Natalie had never told him, because telling him would have required admitting failure, was that Crane Innovations had spent the last 8 months submitting partnership proposals to Hargrove Dynamics. 8 months of pitch decks. 8 months of follow-up calls that went to voicemail. 8 months of rejections so politely worded, they almost disguised the finality inside them. Natalie had never connected the name Hargrove to the quiet woman Marcus had been married to for 12 years. Why would she? Serena never spoke about it. Marcus certainly did not know. And Hargrove Dynamics, by design of the Legacy Trust, carried no public photograph of its incoming heir. None. So Natalie had spent 8 months begging the empire that belonged to the woman whose husband she was stealing. But she did not know that yet. Let us return to the gala. The proposal had landed like a stone in still water, and the ripples were moving fast through 500 people who were now recalibrating everything they thought they understood about the evening. Serena rose from table 9 with the unhurried deliberateness of a woman who had been patient for 12 years and had decided, in the space of a single evening, that patience had served its full purpose. She smoothed the front of her navy dress. She retrieved her clutch from the back of her chair, and then she walked, not toward the exit, toward the center of the room, toward Marcus. He did not see her approaching until she was 4 feet away, and then he saw her, and something in his expression shifted. Not guilt, not yet, but the particular discomfort of a man who had not accounted for his discarded wife, remaining in the room after being discarded. Serena stopped in front of him. She looked at him for a long moment, the way you look at something you once loved and are now studying for the last time, committing it to memory, not out of longing, but out of completion. Then she looked at Natalie, and quietly, so that only the 3 of them could hear it, she said, "Congratulations, Natalie. I genuinely hope the partnership you have been searching for finds you." Natalie's smile flickered. Something about the word partnership, the specific loaded weight Serena placed on it, moved through Natalie like a cold current she could not identify or explain. Serena turned and walked toward the exit. She pushed through the Ashbury Tower's main doors at 10:22 and stopped. The convoy was already there. 12 Bugatti Chiron automobiles, each one obsidian black, each one running, each one positioned with the geometric precision of a military escort. They lined the full length of the tower's entrance. And beyond them, visible at the end of the cleared boulevard, the running lights of a private jet blinked slowly in the dark like a patient, breathing thing. A man in a charcoal suit stepped forward from the lead vehicle. Serena recognized him immediately. His name was Graham Wolfe, head of security for Hargrove Dynamics, a man her grandfather had hired 30 years ago and who had been quietly watching over Serena from a distance for the last decade without her ever asking him to. "Miss Hargrove," he said, "not Mrs. Calloway. Miss Hargrove," the name she had been born with, the name the trust carried, the name that unlocked everything. "The board is assembled. They are ready when you are." Serena looked at the convoy, then at the jet, then back at Graham. And here's where the story pivots. Because what Serena did in that moment was not what anyone watching from the tower's glass entrance expected. She did not get in immediately. She turned back toward the building, and she stood there, facing those glass doors, for exactly 45 seconds. Not from hesitation, not from doubt, because Serena Hargrove was the kind of woman who closed doors properly before she walked through new ones. Inside, through the glass, she could see the ballroom from a distance. She could see Marcus still working the room, still performing, already pivoting from the spectacle of the proposal back to networking. Because that was who Marcus Calloway had always been, a man who moved on before the previous moment had finished breathing. She could see Judith near the bar. She could see Natalie, but Natalie was no longer smiling. Natalie was standing very still, phone in hand, staring at something on her screen with an expression that Serena, even from this distance, recognized immediately. Natalie had just received an email. 4 days before the gala, Serena had sat in Douglas Pemberton's office on the 44th floor and made 3 decisions. The first was to attend the gala. The second was to authorize Douglas to prepare a formal communication to every active partnership applicant currently on the Hargrove Dynamics waitlist. A communication to go out the moment Serena stepped outside the Ashbury Tower's main doors. Not before, the moment after. The third decision was the one that would take Marcus Calloway's entire professional world apart at the seams. Quietly, completely, without a single raised voice. She had signed that authorization with the same calm she brought to ironing his shirts. The email Natalie was reading, the one draining the color from her face in real time in the middle of a ballroom where she was still technically celebrating her engagement, was a formal notice from Hargrove Dynamics. It informed her that Crane Innovation's partnership application had been reviewed at the highest level of the organization and permanently closed. Not rejected, closed. There was a legal distinction, and the email explained it precisely. Closed meant no reapplication, no appeal, no future consideration under any restructured entity or rebranded submission. The door was not locked. The door had been removed entirely. The email was signed, Serena Hargrove, Acting Chair, Hargrove Dynamics. Not Serena Calloway. Serena Hargrove. Natalie read the name 3 times. And on the 3rd time, the full architecture of what she had never understood came down on her like a controlled demolition. Silent. Total. Perfectly timed. The woman she had replaced was the woman who owned the empire she had spent 8 months begging to enter. The jet landed at 4:17 in the morning at Hargrove Dynamics' private aviation facility, a compound Serena had never visited in person, but had seen in photographs her grandfather kept in a leather-bound album he called The Inheritance You Will Grow Into. She had been 9 years old the first time she turned those pages. She had run her finger along the photograph of the airstrip and asked him what it meant to own something that large. Arthur Hargrove had looked at her with the particular patience of a man who understood that some answers were only useful when the person asking them was ready to carry the weight. It means, Arthur had said slowly, that one day, when everything around you tries to make you feel small, you will have somewhere to land. Serena stepped off the jet and onto the tarmac. The air was cool and carried the particular stillness of 4 in the morning, the hour when the world has not yet begun performing itself again. Douglas Pemberton was waiting at the entrance. Beside him stood 5 people, the full active board of Hargrove Dynamics, in the particular formation of people who have been waiting a long time and are choosing not to make that visible. The board's senior director, a measured woman named Victoria Sinclair, stepped forward first. "Miss Hargrove," Victoria said, "welcome home." Serena looked at her, and for the first time since that morning, since the iron, since Judith's SUV, since the microphone and the ring and the pavement and the convoy, Serena felt something unlock in her chest. Not relief exactly. Something older than relief. Something that felt like the completion of a sentence that had been suspended mid-breath for 12 years. "Thank you," Serena said quietly. "Let us get to work." The boardroom was on the facility's upper level, glass on three sides, with the city's pre-dawn skyline visible in every direction like a map of everything that was now hers to navigate. Douglas placed two documents in front of her. The first was the formal activation package for the Hargrove Legacy Trust, 63 pages that would transfer full operational control of Hargrove Dynamics to Serena, effective upon her signature. The second was a blacklist authorization. Serena signed the activation package first. All 63 pages. Calmly. Completely. With the same quiet efficiency she brought to everything she did. Then she looked at the blacklist authorization. Douglas spoke carefully. "The trust has provisions for the protection of the incoming chair's professional ecosystem. Any individual or entity deemed to present a conflict of interest, reputational risk, or direct threat to the chair's standing can be formally flagged across our entire partner network, which currently includes 47 of the top 50 global investment institutions." Serena held the pen over it for a long moment. And here is where the story delivers its most important truth. The one that separates Serena Hargrove from every lesser version of this moment. She did not sign it. Not for Marcus. Not for Natalie. Not even for Judith. She set the pen down. She looked at Douglas. "I will not need that," she said. Douglas tilted his head slightly. "The provisions exist specifically for—" "I know what they exist for," Serena said. "But a blacklist requires me to keep thinking about them, and I am done thinking about them." She folded her hands on the table. "What I need is for you to release our full partner network communication announcing the transition of leadership. I need our revised partnership framework published by 6 a.m. And I need a press briefing scheduled for 9. She paused. "Marcus Calloway and Crane Innovations will not need to be blacklisted, Douglas, because by 9 this morning, every institution in our network will know exactly who I am, and they will draw their own conclusions about the people who threw me into the street." She was right. By 6 a.m., the financial press had picked up the Hargrove leadership transition. By 7, 3 major institutions had quietly suspended their exploratory conversations with Callaway Capital Ventures, pending clarification of relational conflicts. By 8, Marcus's phone had stopped receiving return calls. Not because anyone had been told to ignore him, because 47 institutions with Hargrove partner flags had done exactly what Serena predicted. They had drawn their own conclusions. Marcus spent that morning calling every contact he had built over 15 years of networking. But the rooms he had spent years carefully entering were closing. Not with dramatic declarations, not with confrontation, but with the polite, immovable silence of people who had already made a quiet decision. He called Serena at 8:43. She did not answer. He called again at 8:51 and 9:04 and 9:17, which was precisely the moment Serena walked to a podium in Hargrove Dynamics press facility and introduced herself to the world. Not as Serena Calloway, as Serena Hargrove. Natalie Crane filed for voluntary dissolution of Crane Innovations 11 days later. The press attributed it to funding pressures. Those who knew the full story understood it was something simpler, the complete and permanent closure of every door that might have saved it. Judith Calloway called Serena once. Serena's assistant took the message. Serena never returned it. And Marcus, the man who had stood at a microphone in a gilded ballroom and told 500 people he had been living below his potential, spent the following months discovering, with the particular devastation of someone who had always mistaken access for ownership, that every door he had ever walked through had been held open by the quiet woman he had thrown away. He begged. First the institutions, then mutual contacts, then, in a letter Serena's legal team received and filed without response, Marcus himself. But Serena was not in the business of revenge. She was in the business of Hargrove, and Hargrove was worth $500 billion. There anyone. 11 years before the gala, Marcus had stood in the kitchen of their first apartment, a small but honest place with second-hand furniture and a window that stuck. They had just received a rejection letter from a venture fund he had applied to. He was angry, the particular hot anger of someone who believes their talent is being deliberately overlooked. He crumpled the letter. Then he looked at Serena, who was sitting quietly at the table, and said, "People like us have to fight for everything. Nobody is going to hand us anything. Nobody." She had said nothing, but she had thought, with a careful private clarity that was her most consistent characteristic, that he was half right. Nobody was going to hand him anything. But that was not her situation, and it never had been. She had chosen, in that moment, and in every moment that followed, to stay quiet. Not from weakness, because she understood that Marcus's hunger was not her responsibility to satisfy, and his blindness was not her obligation to correct. She had simply waited. Every cent of Hardgrove Dynamics was built on the foundational principle her grandfather had whispered to a 9-year-old girl turning pages in a leather album. The most dangerous person in any room is the one nobody is watching. Serena Hargrove had spent 12 years being nobody. But nobody, it turned out, had been more than enough. And that is the truth this story leaves with you. Not that revenge is sweet, because Serena never took any. Not that silence is power, because silence alone changes nothing. But that the people you dismiss, the ones you overlook, the ones you throw into the street because you have confused their patience for weakness, those are the ones writing the ending you never saw coming. Remember that the next time you decide someone is worthless, because the quiet ones are always listening, and they never forget. If this story stayed with you, every week, we bring you stories that do not just entertain. They challenge, they transform, and they stay with us. I read every single one. See you in the next one.